Just rewinding back to my childhood, I was always very motivated, very, very driven, very determined. Some would say obsessive compulsive, but I definitely disagree with that. But I channeled all of those traits into my academic studies. So as a child, what was so important to me was doing well at school. And sport was something I very much did for fun. I did join the local swimming club. I had a little shopper bike, but that was really the extent of my sporting prowess. It was always recreational and very much focused on the kind of social side of things. And I carried that philosophy through to university. And I did join the swimming club at uni, and I drank for them very, very, very successfully, but was less well known for my kind of sporting prowess. The coach was always absolutely flabbergasted if I attended more than one training session a week, but I always managed sports night on a Wednesday. First one there. Perfected like the 100-yard dash to the bar. But in all seriousness, no, I focused all of my efforts on my academic studies, and yeah, those obsessive compulsive, self-motivated kind of characteristics did manifest themselves in that. Sport for fun. I gave up sport altogether when I went travelling. I was supposed to go for 9 months, and I returned 2 years later. But it was, I think we all meet people through our lives that have a real impact on us, and it was when I was travelling that I met one of the first people that would have a profound impact on the direction that my life would take. And at that point I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, so I'd signed for a law firm in London, and they foolishly allowed me to go travelling. And while I was travelling, I was in Africa, I started to question the wisdom of that decision, whether it was right for me. I met a South African girl, and she said something very, very simple to me, but I think we'd all be mindful to remember this. She said, "Chrissie, look deep inside yourself and work out what your passion really is." And it sounds really simple, but I hadn't done it. I was following a path that I thought I ought to follow, rather than what I was actually really, really passionate about. So I did as she suggested. And I realised that my passion ever since I was young was international development. Not that I knew it as international development growing up, I just knew it as caring absolutely passionately about the world around me, and crying at images of the Ethiopian famine on TV and vowing to do something to make a difference. So when I came back from travelling, I did my MA in development economics up in Manchester, and it was then I started running. So when I was travelling in Australia, sport, didn't do it, pies, ate a lot of, and I'd gotten kind of puffy, and I thought the best way to lose some of the puff was to start running. So I'd not really run before, had no clue about running training, so 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, obsessive compulsive, that soon increased. But I just ran at the same pace for the, you know, in same route up in Manchester. And then I thought to myself, I'm going to run the London Marathon. And I got myself a charity place and trained, moved down to London, started working for the UK government on international development policy, and carried on training, carried on running in a very unstructured, unknowledgeable, but very obsessive fashion. And I surprised myself in 2002 by running my first marathon in 3:08. I never could have imagined that I would be able to run what at that time seemed to me to be, you know, a phenomenal time. And I remember really, really surprising myself and thinking back and thinking, why did I place that limit on what I thought I could achieve? So I started taking running a bit more seriously. I started training with Frank Horwell, the legendary late Frank Horwell, down at Battersea Track. And got injured inevitably, and started swimming again. And it was then in 2004 that I would meet another person that would change the direction my life would take, and I think you've all met one of these people, and if you haven't, you will do, maybe even today. And he said something incredibly profound to me. It was, "Chrissie, have you done a triathlon?" or do you want to do a triathlon? And I just thought, well, actually my first response was, I've never ridden a bike, a road bike. Don't worry, Chrissie, we'll get you a bike. So I've got this third-hand bike, a Peugeot, which I still have. It looks like a Bumblebee, it's like yellow and black. Regular pedals, didn't have a clue how to change the gears. I was a novice triathlete and a totally novice cyclist. I turned up at the Sigma Sport group ride, somewhat embarrassingly, with my bright yellow canary shirt and my running shorts and a bum bag for my spares, and got dropped like a hot potato on the first ride. And I did a couple of sprint triathlons in 2004, and then I took a sabbatical from my job and went to live and work in Nepal in 2004. I was managing development projects out there, but when I wasn't working, I was cycling, and the day after I arrived I bought a mountain bike, and like I've named all my bikes, I named this one, and it was called Prem, which is Nepali for boyfriend, and we spent a lot of time together every morning, longer on weekends, and I had some great times cycling, mainly with, well, a couple of Westerners and Nepali Sherpas, and it was at that time that I realised, which again was a surprise to me, that I had quite a high level of endurance on the bike, relative even to the Sherpas that are renowned for their capacity to endure pain and altitude. We had some amazing adventures. One of them was we cycled across the Himalayas from Lhasa, 1,400 kilometers over the Himalayas back to Kathmandu, all 5,000 meters via Everest Base Camp. And whilst I think the effects of altitude definitely dissipate after a couple of weeks, I think the mental strength that I gained from enduring some of the conditions up at those altitudes have really stayed with me and have shaped me into the athlete that I am today, because I surprised myself by what I could endure when I was cycling over there in Nepal, and also of course seeing what other people endure in terms of the daily poverty really stays with you and makes you realise how lucky you are, and also that the human body and spirit has a huge capacity to endure more than we think we can. Anyway, I got back to UK in 2006, and I thought, right, I'll give triathlon a really good go. I entered my first race, which was the infamous Redditch Super Sprint. And one of the top tips I'm sure everyone will share with you is don't use new equipment the day, there's a race. I didn't have a wetsuit. So I borrowed one the day before the race, and I tried it on, and I thought, for my friend, and I thought, oh, this wetsuit fits perfectly. Didn't really have a clue about wetsuits. I got in the water. It was tropical. It was like the Serpentines. It was like 14 degrees at Redditch, and you laugh about people not coming out of the swim, because bang, the gun goes off, and the pack kind of goes off into the distance, and my wetsuit, I must have lost like 20 pounds overnight, because the wetsuit was way too big, totally flooded. I couldn't even get my arms out of the water and had to be rescued by a kayaker, and that was the end of my first race, and that was in 2006, so that was only like 7 years ago. Anyway, didn't let it put me off, and did the next race, which was qualification for the World Age Group Championships, and much to my surprise I managed to win that race. I got a coach then, trained really hard whilst juggling my full-time job for the World Age Groups, which were in Lausanne in 2006 in Switzerland. I never went into that race ever expecting to win my age group or win overall, and that's exactly what happened. And I knew at that point I had a huge decision to make, and that was whether or not to become a professional athlete. And it was such a scary decision. I had a job I loved. I wasn't earning an absolute fortune, but I was financially secure. I had all my friends in London. I had, was renting a house in London. And I knew nothing about triathlon. I knew nothing about the triathlon lifestyle. I didn't know whether I'd be able to make a success of the sport. I didn't even know whether I'd enjoy it. But I never ever want to look back and think what if. None of us should ever look back and think what if. And we might be scared, and we might be scared of failure, of the unknown, of what we look like in Lycra, but we can either let those fears stop us, or we can face them and take that plunge. And I did that, age 30, and took the plunge and became a professional athlete in 2007, which is, you know, 6 years ago. And I did so only with the intention of being an Olympic distance athlete. Ironman, like I said, was something that crazy, stupid people did. I could never imagine running a marathon after swimming and cycling, or that way. It's inconceivable to me. But then my coach persuaded me to do the outdoors long course triathlon, which, whilst not an Ironman in distance, is an Ironman in intensity and difficulty. And after that he said, "Chrissie, do you want to do an Ironman?" And I said, "Am I ready?" That's all I said. He said, "Yeah." I was on the start line of Ironman Korea with my road bike, my regular training wheels, absolutely no clue about sports and nutrition. I didn't even have a race kit, so I was so tight with money that I borrowed my friends, and I still have it, and I wore it in Kona. And well, quite a bit of money now. But I never went into that Ironman expecting to win. I had no clue what to expect, and I didn't have that confidence in myself to be able to believe that I was capable of the victory. And that's what happened. And I won Ironman Korea, and that gave me a slot 6 weeks later for Kona in 2007. I got a time trial bike. I learned how to ride it in those 5-6 weeks. My dream result was to get into the top 10. I never thought I would win that race. That was something that happened to other people and not to me. And as you know, I managed to win. And I crossed that finish line in Kona. It's the most surreal experience. I was so surprised. I don't know if any of you have had the privilege of going to Kona, but when you're coming down the finish line, the Hawaiians blow into a conch shell, and it sounds like, like not a cow, but like a conch shell. I was so flabbergasted that I was in the lead, that I thought people were booing me because they didn't want me to win, because they didn't know who I was. And I was so confused and so surprised, but so elated. And I crossed that finish line, and and this is a lesson to all of us, you've got to bank that feeling when you cross that finish line, because you're drawing it over and over again. And I banked that feeling, and I remember it distinctly, thinking, this is a moment that has changed my life forever. Not because I'd won the biggest race in the world necessarily, because I knew at that point I had the most amazing opportunity to have the platform that I'd always dreamed of when I was younger, to affect positive change. And I realised at that point that I then had a voice. And I think that's what made that victory and the victories since so important. And fast forward now, I still have to pinch myself to believe that I'm four-time Ironman world champion. It is not something that I ever expected to happen. It's not something that I could have ever envisioned happening to someone like me, and it's not something that I ever could have prepared for. And looking back at this journey, like I said at the start, I just wanted to elicit some of the key lessons that I've learned that hopefully will be lessons to all of you. And the first one is not to let fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of the unexpected, what if I fail, don't let those fears stop you, because if I'd let my fears stop me, I'd never have started triathlon, never would have done my first marathon, never would have gone to Nepal, and I certainly wouldn't have become a professional athlete or done my first Ironman. Sometimes we don't know the outcome. You just have to be prepared to try and be unwilling to think back and think, what, you know, or look back and think, what if? The second one is that mistakes are essential. And I'll tell you now, you won't have perfect preparation and you won't have a perfect race. You know, I've made mistakes, I've been injured, I've sunk in the swim, I've had GI issues in about 6 Ironmans I've done. I've made mistakes and nothing's gone perfectly. Sometimes you think your world has come to an end when you've had a bad race. You look back and those are the races, those are the occasions that make you stronger. I remember reading something that J.K. Rowling said, and she said something like rock bottom was the foundation from which I rebuilt my life. And I always remember that, because then she wrote quite a few successful books. But it is. Sometimes those mistakes, those problems, those disasters make us really, really strong, because they're the times that you recall when, you know, adversity strikes during a race. So I truly believe that the perfect race is the one where you overcome imperfections perfectly. And that might not make sense, but just try and think about it for a minute. My perfect race was in Kona in 2011. Not because it was the fastest time I'd ever done, not because I felt the best I'd ever felt. I went into that race absolutely annihilated because I had a bike crash a few weeks before. I didn't even think I could start the race. But that race was perfect in that I overcame all the imperfections perfectly, and it was the race that I'd always dreamed of, that race where I fought tooth and nail within myself and fought tooth and nail with my competitors, and it was a race that I'm so incredibly proud of. So you go into a race and not everything will go according to plan, but if you overcome those problems the best possible way that you can, then that's success. That's your measure of success, not the time on the clock. Knowing that that day and in training you've been the best athlete and the best person that you can be, and you can't ask for any more. And you have to liberate yourself from being wedded to that time on the clock as your sole measure of success. And lastly, as I'm sure you realise, the thread that runs through all of the story that I've just told is that every single step of the way I've placed limits on what I thought I could achieve. I'm so guilty of that. You know, oh, I don't think I could ever run I could run 20 minutes, let alone I could run a marathon. You know, I could never win the World Age Group Championships. I'd never do an Ironman. I'd never win Kona. And I'd certainly never win Kona in 2011. And every single step of the way, I've defied what I thought was possible. And I've defied those preconceived limits of what I've put on myself. And that is so empowering, and you all have to remember that and try not to place those limits on yourself, because you're capable of so much more than you think you are. You really, really are. And I'm learning that, and that's the biggest lesson that I've taken from my life and my triathlon journey, and it's empowered me no end. And I just wanted to finish off just by touching very quickly on what I see as the best things about triathlon. Some of you haven't done a triathlon, and you will do. Some of you have done many, and so hopefully what I'm about to say will resonate with you. First and foremost, it's the friendship and the camaraderie. Triathlon is absolutely unique in that. The support networks that we have as triathletes are phenomenal. In this small island that we all live on, there are 600 triathlon clubs. America doesn't have that number of triathlon clubs. it's phenomenal, and I've lived in the States and it doesn't have that support network that we have here. So use it, get involved, make friends, be part of your club, volunteer. We've got an amazing support network, and that should all help us improve and grow, whether you're a novice, whether you're an aspiring elite. And I think that that's part of the reason why Britain is so successful, because we do have that grassroots support network in place. Secondly, the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to see amazing places. This is an absolute once in a lifetime opportunity. I got goosebumps watching this. I mean, London, being able to swim, bike and run around some of the most iconic buildings in London, it's the most phenomenal opportunity. And if you can't race, volunteer or come down to spectate, because I truly believe that coming to some of these races, having the opportunity to go to Kona, racing in Lausanne, being in Roth, I mean, that it's absolutely phenomenal, and triathlon and our sport allows us that opportunity. The challenge, it doesn't get better than a triathlon. And sometimes people come to me and say, well, Chrissie, I've only done a sprint. I say, don't pressy that with only. A sprint is as much of a challenge to people as an Ironman. A sprint is actually more of a challenge sometimes to me than an Ironman is, because you're racing in a very different manner. So it's the challenge. Embrace the challenge, but don't set those limits on yourself. And lastly, I think that the best thing about triathlon is that it forces you to grow, not only in body but also in mind. And I think the best triathlete is the one that's not only physically strong but also mentally prepared. And I think that that's probably the biggest lesson that I've taken away. It's not always the most physically prepared athlete that will win the day. So triathlon is phenomenal in that it forces you to grow, not only physically but also mentally, and that's something that you'll carry with you beyond your triathlon years. So as Robert said, I'm here until 2 to answer any questions that you have, whether they're training related or otherwise. So yeah, just feel free to bombard me or the RG team with any questions that you have. But I just want to finish off by saying it's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's a real privilege to be here. This is where at the World Champs it really all started for me in Lausanne in 2006. So to be part of something this big and this life-changing for many of you is an honour. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.